Ethan Vance, the handsome CEO of Vance Media, had it all: a beautiful pregnant wife, Amelia, and a name synonymous with power. But he threw it all away for a younger actress, publicly and cruelly divorcing Amelia to start a new life. He thought he was finally escaping his father's shadow. What he forgot was that his father, the legendary tech billionaire Harrison Vance, owned that shadow. This is the incredible story of a patriarch who, when forced to choose between his own son and his beloved daughter-in-law, decided to disinherit his bloodline and hand his empire to her. The Vance family did not live in a home. They occupied a command center. The sprawling, minimalist estate in Atherton, California, was less a symbol of domestic bliss and more a monument to the cold, brilliant mind of its creator, Harrison Vance. Harrison was a titan, a first-generation tech legend who had built his multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, Vance Innovations, from a garage startup into a global force in software and artificial intelligence. He was a man who valued two things above all else: loyalty and results. His son, Ethan Vance, had struggled his entire life to deliver on both. Ethan was the CEO of Vance Media, a subsidiary of the larger conglomerate. It was a respectable, profitable division focused on digital content and streaming services. But in the galaxy of Vance Innovations, it was a minor planet orbiting the sun that was Harrison. Ethan hadn't built Vance Media. He had inherited its leadership. He lived in a state of perpetual simmering resentment, desperate to prove that the Vance name on his office door was more than just a birthright. The bridge between the distant, demanding father and the resentful, insecure son was Amelia Vance. Amelia was Ethan's wife, a woman of quiet intelligence, grace, and a warmth that seemed entirely out of place in the sterile world of the Vances. A former art curator, she had a genuine, deep and loving relationship with her father-in-law. Harrison, a man not known for his sentimentality, adored her. He saw in Amelia the integrity, loyalty, and strength he found lacking in his own son. She was in his eyes more of a Vance than Ethan was. Now Amelia was 7 months pregnant with the first Vance grandchild. To Harrison, this was not just a family milestone. It was a matter of legacy. The future of his empire, the continuation of his life's work, was growing inside the one person in his family he unequivocally trusted. The tension in the House of Vance was a constant low hum beneath the surface of their opulent lives. Ethan saw his father's affection for Amelia as a betrayal, another piece of evidence that he would never measure up. He treated his wife's bond with his father as a threat, a secret alliance against him. "You're always taking his side," he would accuse Amelia after a tense Sunday dinner at the estate. "You look at him with this admiration. You never look at me that way." "That's not true, Ethan," Amelia would reply gently, trying to soothe his fragile ego. "I admire you, but your father is a legend. Of course I respect him." "He's a tyrant," Ethan would mutter, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "And he uses you to control me." Amelia dismissed his paranoia as stress. The pressure he was under was immense, but lately his resentment had taken on a sharper, crueler edge. He had become distant working late, his phone always angled away from her. He was more concerned with the public image of their marriage than the private reality of it. Unbeknownst to Amelia and Harrison, Ethan had begun an affair. His mistress was Chloe Sterling, a beautiful, ambitious actress with a minor role on a popular streaming show produced by Vance Media. Chloe was everything. Amelia was not fiery, demanding, and deeply impressed by Ethan's power. She flattered his ego, praised his vision, and encouraged his rebellion against his father. She was the spark he thought he needed to finally set his own world on fire, not realizing it would be a funeral pyre for the life he knew. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet, private heartbreak. It was a public execution, meticulously planned and brutally executed by Ethan. He chose the annual Vance Innovations Philanthropy Gala as his stage. The event was the pinnacle of the Silicon Valley social calendar, a gathering of the tech world's most powerful figures, all there to pay tribute to the man at the center of their universe, Harrison Vance. Amelia, radiant in a deep blue gown that accentuated her pregnant form, felt a sense of unease all evening. Ethan was strangely attentive, almost performatively so. He held her hand tightly, kissed her for the cameras, and never strayed far from her side. She mistook his behavior for a renewed sense of affection, a sign that they were moving past their recent tensions. In reality, he was positioning his victim in the center of the spotlight before pulling the trigger. The moment he chose was during his own speech. As the CEO of Vance Media, he was scheduled to give a short presentation on the Foundation's work in digital literacy. He walked to the podium, looking confident and handsome. He spoke eloquently about the future of media, about their commitment to quality content. And then he went off script. "As we look to the future," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone, "we must also be honest about our pasts and be brave enough to forge new paths. Which is why it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that my wife Amelia and I have made the difficult but mutual decision to separate." A shocked collective gasp swept through the ballroom. 300 of the most influential people in the world turned to stare at Amelia, who was seated at the head table next to a stunned Harrison. Her smile froze on her face, her mind struggling to process his words. Mutual decision. This was the first she was hearing of it. Ethan continued, his voice filled with a practiced false sincerity. "Amelia is a wonderful woman, and she will be an incredible mother. I will always respect her. But our paths have diverged. I wish her nothing but the best." It was a perfectly crafted statement, painting him as a sensitive modern man, making a painful but mature choice. But then, as he was stepping away from the podium, a reporter from a notorious tech gossip site, clearly tipped off, shouted a question. "Ethan, is it true that you're now in a relationship with actress Chloe Sterling?" Ethan paused, a dramatic, calculated hesitation. He turned back to the microphone, a faint, almost sad smile on his face. "Chloe and I have grown very close," he said. "She's a remarkable woman, and I would ask that you all respect our privacy as we begin this new chapter." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and the frantic clicking of camera phones. He had not just announced his divorce. He had announced his affair from the stage of his own father's gala. He had taken the most private, painful moment of his wife's life and turned it into a public relations strategy for his new relationship. Amelia sat frozen, the blood draining from her face. The air in her lungs felt thick, impossible to breathe. It was a humiliation so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She looked at her father-in-law. Harrison Vance's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He was not looking at Ethan. He was looking at Amelia. His eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. A hand gently touched her arm. It was Harrison's head of security. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Let's go." They rose, and with as much dignity as she could muster, Amelia allowed herself to be escorted from the ballroom, a silent, graceful exit from the wreckage of her life. As she walked, she could hear the pop of flash bulbs behind her, as Ethan, her husband, posed for the first official photos with the idea of his new love, the actress Chloe Sterling, who had just coincidentally arrived at the gala. The ride back to the Atherton estate was a silent, suffocating journey. Amelia stared out the window of the Rolls-Royce, the glittering lights of Silicon Valley, blurring into meaningless streaks. She felt nothing. The shock had cauterized her emotions, leaving a profound, hollow numbness. Harrison sat beside her, his large frame rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. He did not speak, but the rage emanating from him was a palpable physical force in the car. When they arrived at the estate, Harrison led her not to a guest room, but to the master suite wing, to a beautiful private apartment overlooking the gardens that he and his late wife had prepared years ago, hoping it would one day be a nursery for their grandchildren. "This is your home now, Amelia," he said, his voice a low rumble, "for as long as you need it." Amelia finally broke the numbness, giving way to a tidal wave of grief. She collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs. Harrison stood by helplessly for a moment, a man more comfortable with hostile takeovers than with tears. He then did something he rarely did. He walked over and placed a heavy, comforting hand on her shoulder, a silent promise of unwavering support. An hour later, the sound of a car screeching up the long driveway announced Ethan's arrival. He had clearly been drinking, his face flushed with a mixture of celebratory adrenaline and belligerent defiance. He strode into the grand hall of the main house, expecting to find Amelia ready to deliver a speech he had no doubt rehearsed about his right to be happy. Instead, he found his father waiting for him, standing alone in the center of the vast marble-floored room. "Where is she?" Ethan demanded, foregoing any greeting. "Amelia is resting," Harrison said, his voice dangerously calm. "She will not be speaking with you. Not tonight. Not ever again without a lawyer present." "Oh, come on, Father," Ethan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a clean break. Better to be honest about it than to drag it out for months." Harrison stared at his son, his eyes filled with a look of such profound contempt that Ethan faltered for a moment. "A clean break," Harrison repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You took your pregnant wife, the woman carrying your child, my grandchild, and you publicly humiliated her in front of the entire world. You used my foundation, my name, my house, as the stage for the launch of your sordid little affair. You call that a clean break. I call it a declaration of war." Ethan's fear was quickly replaced by his lifelong resentment. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the confrontation he had been craving. "This is my life, Father," he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Mine, not a division of Vance Innovations. You don't control me. You don't get to approve of my choices. I am my own man." "You are a fool," Harrison said, his voice cutting through Ethan's tirade like a shard of ice. "You have never been your own man. You are a man who has lived his entire life on an allowance of my money, my reputation, and my tolerance. You have mistaken my generosity for your own success." He took a step forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You are correct about one thing. I don't control your personal life. You are free to sleep with whomever you wish. You are free to make a fool of yourself in the tabloids. But I do control your company. I do control your inheritance. I do control the name you so carelessly disgrace." He stopped, standing inches from his son. "And you, Ethan," he said, his voice a low, final decree, have just made a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering miscalculation." He turned his back on his son, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "My security will see you out. You are no longer welcome in this house. Your access to the company's accounts and properties has been terminated effective immediately. You will hear from my lawyers in the morning regarding your position at Vance Media." Ethan stood stunned into silence. The drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying understanding of what he had just done. He had not just broken his marriage, he had broken the unwritten covenant with the source of all his power. "You can't do that," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. Harrison paused at the doorway, but did not turn around. "I can," he said, his voice carrying the weight of $1 billion empire. "And I will." The morning after the gala, the business world awoke to a new, shocking reality. Harrison Vance, a man known for his strategic patience and emotional restraint, moved with the speed and ferocity of a lightning strike. He did not delegate. He did not deliberate. He acted. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, he convened an emergency teleconference of the executive board of the parent company, Vance Innovations. The board was comprised of long-serving, fiercely loyal members who owed their careers and their fortunes to Harrison. They were less a board of directors and more a council of war. Harrison's announcement was brief and brutal. "Effective immediately, Ethan Vance is suspended from his duties as CEO of the Vance Media subsidiary, pending a leadership review. I am invoking my authority as chairman and majority shareholder to freeze all capital allocations and intercompany resource sharing with Vance Media. They are, for all intents and purposes, quarantined." There were no objections. There was only a stunned silence, followed by quiet affirmations of support. The board knew that Harrison's personal and professional lives were inextricably linked. An attack on his family was an attack on the stability of the entire empire, and he was cauterizing the wound before the infection could spread. Ethan received the news not from his father, but from a coldly worded official email from the board's secretary. He was sitting in the hotel suite he had shared with Chloe Sterling, a half-eaten room service breakfast congealing on the table. He read the email, then read it again, the words blurring in front of his eyes. Suspended. Capital frozen. Leadership review. It was a corporate death sentence. Vance Media, while profitable, was heavily reliant on the parent company's vast resources. It used Vance Innovations' proprietary AI for its content recommendation algorithms, its massive server farms for its streaming services, and its deep pockets for new acquisitions. Without that support, Vance Media was a ship without an engine, dead in the water. Chloe, who had been excitedly reading the glowing press coverage of their debut as a couple, noticed his ashen face. "What is it, honey?" she asked, her voice bright. "My father," Ethan choked out. "He's cutting me off. He's freezing the company." The concern on Chloe's face was instantly replaced by a flicker of something else, a cold, calculating fear. This was not what she had signed up for. She had attached herself to a prince, a powerful heir. She had not signed up for a pariah in the midst of a family war with a king who held all the cards. While Ethan was reeling, Harrison was making his next move. He summoned his personal legal team, a cadre of the most feared corporate lawyers in Silicon Valley. His instructions were simple. "I want you to conduct a full audit of the Vance Family Trust and my personal will," he commanded. "I want to explore every legal avenue to restructure my son's inheritance. Find the character and integrity clause we drafted years ago. I want to know exactly how much latitude it gives me." He then turned to the head of his M&A team. "I also want a full valuation of the Vance Media division. I want to know what its assets are worth, stripped of the Vance Innovations infrastructure. I want to know what it would look like if we broke it up and sold it for parts. The message was clear. He was not just sidelining his son. He was preparing to erase him both from the family fortune and from the corporate empire he had built. For Amelia, these days were a strange, surreal blur. She was ensconced in the quiet luxury of the Seacliff estate, shielded from the storm. Harrison had insisted she see a top obstetrician to ensure the stress hadn't affected the baby. He had provided her with a discreet therapist. He treated her not as a victim to be pitied, but as a valued family member who had been wounded and needed to heal. He visited her every evening in her suite. He didn't speak much of his plans regarding Ethan. He would simply sit with her, ask about the baby, and talk about the future in broad, reassuring strokes. One evening he found her looking at a proposal she had written months before a passion project she had presented to Ethan, who had dismissed it as unprofitable. It was a plan to create a foundation within Vance Media dedicated to funding and developing high-quality educational children's programming. He said it was a distraction from our core business. Amelia said, her voice tinged with a lingering sadness. Harrison took the proposal and read it, his expression thoughtful. He was a fool, he said after a long silence. This isn't a distraction. It's a legacy. He handed the proposal back to her, a strange, determined glint in his eye. Don't throw this away, Amelia. I think you might have a use for it, very soon. Amelia was confused by the remark, but in the coming days she would understand. Harrison Vance was not just dismantling his son's world. He was already planning what to build in its place, and he had decided that the architect of the family's future would not be his own son, but the woman his son had so foolishly cast aside. While Ethan was frantically trying to stop the bleeding at Vance Media, his power and influence draining away with each passing hour, Harrison Vance was orchestrating his masterstroke. It was a move of such breathtaking audacity and strategic brilliance that it would be talked about in Silicon Valley for years to come. It was not just an act of punishment against his son, it was a fundamental reordering of his own legacy. He called a second, even more exclusive meeting. This time it was not the full board, but his core inner circle, his chief financial officer, the head of his legal team, and a few trusted long-serving board members. They met in the main conference room at the Vance Innovations campus, a room known as the Observatory, for its panoramic views and the high-stakes decisions made within it. Harrison stood before them, not as an emotional father, but as the visionary chairman who had guided the company for 4 decades. Vance Innovations has always been about the future. He began, his voice calm and authoritative. We have pioneered advancements in artificial intelligence, in software, in enterprise solutions. But the world is changing. The public's trust in technology is eroding. They see us, rightly or wrongly, as amoral behemoths. We need to do more than just innovate. We need to invest in our own humanity. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Therefore, I am announcing a major new strategic initiative. We are forming a new independent division within the conglomerate. This division will have a dual mandate to act as a venture capital fund for ethical and socially responsible technology, and to oversee all of the Vance family's philanthropic endeavors. It will be the moral and creative compass of our entire organization. He let the announcement sink in. It was a massive, unexpected move. This new division, he continued, will be seeded with an initial endowment of $1 billion from the Vance Family Trust. A quiet gasp went through the room. $1 billion was a staggering sum, even for a company of their size. And, Harrison said, delivering the final stunning blow, It will be called the Amelia Vance Foundation. Its president and chief executive officer will be Amelia Vance. The silence in the room was absolute. The implications were seismic. He had not just created a new, powerful division. He had put his daughter-in-law, a woman with no official corporate title, in charge of it. He had taken a significant portion of the family's wealth and future and handed it to her. Amelia. Harrison explained, his tone leaving no room for argument. Possesses the integrity, the vision and the character that this initiative requires. Her background in the arts and her passion for education make her uniquely qualified to guide our investments in a more humane direction. She will have the full unconditional support of this board and this company. It was checkmate. He had effectively elevated Amelia to a position of immense power within the Vance empire, making her a senior executive on par with the heads of his most important divisions. She was no longer just the estranged wife of a subsidiary CEO. She was the face of the company's future, the steward of its soul. He had created a new heir. The public announcement was released an hour later. The news spread like wildfire. It was a brilliant PR move, recasting the narrative from a sordid family drama into a story of a visionary company empowering a woman of integrity. The press lauded the move, praising Harrison's bold vision and Amelia's quiet strength. When Amelia first heard the news from Harrison himself, she was stunned into silence. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I don't have the experience to run something like that." "You have the character," Harrison replied simply. "That is the only qualification that matters. I will give you the best team in the world to support you. All I need from you is your vision and your integrity. This foundation, Amelia, is for you and your child. It is your inheritance. It is the future of this family. I am asking you to lead it." It was an incredible, terrifying opportunity. It was a chance to take the ideas she was passionate about, the ideas Ethan had dismissed, and turn them into a powerful force for good. It was her chance to build her own legacy. A legacy for her child, separate from the wreckage of her marriage. "Yes," she said. Finally, her voice filled with a new quiet determination. "Yes, I'll do it." For Ethan, the news was the final soul-crushing blow. He saw it on a news alert on his phone while sitting in a sterile lawyer's office. He read the headline, "Harrison Vance launches billion-dollar foundation, headed by daughter-in-law Amelia Vance." And he felt a kind of psychological vertigo. His father had not just disowned him. He had replaced him. He had taken his wife, the woman he had cast aside, and elevated her to a position of power and prestige that he, the son and heir, had never been able to achieve on his own. His rebellion, his desperate attempt to escape his father's shadow, had resulted in the one outcome he had always feared most. He had been rendered utterly, completely irrelevant. The creation of the Amelia Vance Foundation was the public-facing philanthropic masterstroke. But behind the scenes, the siege of Vance Media was a campaign of a different sort. A cold, brutal, and systematic dismantling of a corporate entity orchestrated by a man who treated business as a bloodless form of warfare. The first blow landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital hum. On a Monday morning, the entire technological infrastructure of Vance Media began to seize up. The crisis started in the engineering department, a frantic series of alerts pinging across their screens. Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant but perpetually stressed head of engineering, watched in horror as her diagnostic panels lit up with red warnings. The connection to the Vance Innovations mainframe, the supercomputing core that housed the Prometheus AI, had been severed. She burst into Ethan's glass-walled office, her face a mask of controlled panic. "He's done it, Ethan," she said, her voice tight. "He's cut us off. Your father has unplugged us from the mothership." Ethan, who had been trying to project an aura of defiant normalcy, felt a cold spike of fear. "What are you talking about? The Prometheus AI?" Aris exclaimed, her voice rising. "Our entire content recommendation engine, our ad-serving platform, our user analytics, it all runs on Prometheus. Without it, our streaming service is just a glorified YouTube channel from 2008. We are flying blind, and the engine has just flamed out." The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. By noon, that Advance Media Down was trending on social media. Users were complaining of a clunky, unresponsive interface and bizarrely irrelevant content suggestions. The company's automated ad sales platform, which generated millions in revenue per day, was failing, unable to target users effectively. They were not just losing viewers, they were actively hemorrhaging money with every passing second. Ethan convened an emergency meeting of his executive team. The atmosphere in the boardroom, once a place of arrogant self-congratulation, was now thick with the stench of fear. He tried to rally them, his voice unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "This is a temporary measure," he insisted, pacing in front of the panoramic window. "A negotiating tactic. My father is a bully, and this is how he operates. He's trying to scare us. We need to hold the line, show him we won't be intimidated. We'll build our own AI. We'll find new partners." Eleanor Hayes, his pragmatic and long-suffering COO, looked at him as if he were a delusional child. "Build our own AI, Ethan?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Prometheus is the result of a 20-year, $5 billion investment from Vance Innovations. You expect us to replicate it with what resources? The capital financing for our entire fall slate was frozen this morning. Our top 3 production partners have already put us on notice for breach of contract. We are in a state of corporate cardiac arrest, and you are talking about training for a marathon." She leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a siege. And the enemy isn't at the gates. He's in our own server rooms, and he has just turned off the power. We need a survival strategy, not a suicide mission." His own team was looking at him not as a leader, but as the architect of their ruin. His authority had evaporated. He was a king with no army, no treasury, and no castle. Desperate and enraged, Ethan turned to the only weapon he thought he had left the law. He retained Sterling Kyle, a notoriously aggressive litigator, known for his scorched earth tactics. In Kyle's gleaming Century City office, Ethan vented his fury, outlining a massive multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against his own father. "We'll depose him," Ethan raged, pacing the plush carpet. "We'll subpoena every document from Vance Innovations for the last decade. We'll expose him for the tyrant he is." Kyle, a man who saw conflict as a business opportunity, eagerly drafted a blistering legal threat. It was a 20-page document filled with accusations of breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference, and corporate sabotage. It was a declaration of all-out legal war. He had it sent via a stone-faced courier to Harrison's legal department. The response arrived the following afternoon. It was not a legal brief, but a slim, elegant portfolio delivered by a quiet, unassuming legal aide. Inside was a single-page letter, a masterpiece of understated, terrifying force. It stated in cool, formal language that should Ethan proceed with his frivolous and vexatious lawsuit, the discovery process would, of course, be a two-way street. It would compel Vance Innovations to publicly release the full, unredacted findings of its internal leadership review of the Vance Media division. Attached was a 2-page summary of said review. It was not a collection of vague accusations. It was a forensic accounting of Ethan's professional and personal misconduct, a timeline of his failures, It listed with dates and amounts the improper use of corporate accounts for personal travel apartments and gifts for Miss Chloe Sterling. It referenced sworn affidavits from female employees detailing a pattern of inappropriate behavior. It included a detailed analysis from the parent company's CFO, showing how Ethan's reckless, ego-driven acquisitions had cost the company nearly $100 million in losses. Sterling Kyle read the summary, his face slowly draining of color. The aggressive, confident litigator seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He looked up at Ethan, his expression a mixture of awe and terror at the machine they were up against. "We have to stand down, Ethan," Kyle said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This isn't a lawsuit they're threatening. This is a character assassination, and they have the receipts. This isn't a threat. It's an execution order. If we file, they won't just win in court. They will release this. They will destroy you in the press so completely that you will never work in this country again. We have been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and utterly checkmated." That night, Ethan returned to the hotel suite, a man hollowed out by defeat. The last of his hope was gone. He was looking for some small measure of comfort, of human connection in the wreckage. He found Chloe on the phone with her agent, her voice bright and bubbly as she discussed a potential audition. When she hung up, the smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of bored irritation as she saw him. "You look terrible," she said, turning to the mirror to examine her makeup. "I had a bad day," he said, his voice cracking. "Chloe, we need to talk. We need to figure out what we're going to do." "I know what I'm going to do," she said, snapping a tube of lipstick shut. "I'm going to Vancouver next week. There's a new pilot. The part is fantastic." "Vancouver," he stammered. "But what about us?" "I blew up my entire life. For you. For us." She finally turned to face him, and her beautiful face was a mask of cold, dismissive pity. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, Ethan, don't be so naive," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You didn't do this for me. You did this for you. This was never about our love story. This was about your pathetic, lifelong psychodrama with your father. You were a little boy, throwing a tantrum trying to prove you could break his favorite toy. I was just the shiny, exciting rock you decided to throw." She walked to the closet and pulled out her already packed suitcases. "The problem is you missed. You didn't even scratch his favorite toy. You just managed to set your own treehouse on fire. I attached myself to the heir of an empire, a prince. It turns out you're just a disgraced, unemployed middle manager who is about to be cut off from his trust fund. That is a brand I simply cannot be associated with." She wheeled her suitcases to the door. "Your father, for all his faults, is a man of immense power. He builds things. You," she said, delivering the final devastating verdict, "just break them, starting with your own life." She opened the door and walked out without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of the suite, a king in a kingdom of one, his reign officially and irrevocably over. While Ethan's world was being reduced to ashes, Amelia's was rising. She had moved into a beautiful, light-filled home on the Seacliff estate, a place of peace and new beginnings. Her days were no longer defined by her husband's moods, but by her own burgeoning purpose. The first official board meeting of the Amelia Vance Foundation was a testament to her transformation. She sat at the head of a table filled with some of the sharpest minds her father-in-law employed. Harrison was there, but he sat to the side, a quiet, observant presence, allowing her to command the room. And she did. She presented a comprehensive 5-year strategic plan, her voice filled with a passion and authority that captivated them all. She spoke of ethical investing, of leveraging their vast resources to create a new paradigm of corporate responsibility. After the meeting, one of the board members, a legendary venture capitalist, approached Harrison. "She's a natural, Harrison," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "She has your strategic mind, but I dare say she has a better heart." Harrison simply nodded, a rare, proud smile touching his lips. Later that evening, Amelia walked through the quiet gardens of the estate, the cool evening air a balm on her skin. She felt her daughter kick a strong, reassuring thump against her ribs. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The siege she had witnessed was a story of destruction, a cautionary tale of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had been burned to cinders by his own hubris. But her story, and the story of the child she carried, was just beginning. It would not be a story of inherited power, but of purpose discovered. It was the quiet, unshakable ascent of a new and better kind of legacy. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not a call from his father's assistant or a text from a family member. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by a stoic legal courier to the hotel suite that had become Ethan's gilded prison. The letter within was cold, formal, and utterly terrifying. It was a legal notice summoning him to a formal meeting at the headquarters of Vance Innovations in 1 week's time. The subject was listed as the restructuring of the Vance Family Trust and the terms of your separation from all Vance-related entities. The list of required attendees included his father, Harrison Vance, Amelia Vance, and a team of estate lawyers from the prestigious firm of Albright, Sterling and Moore. For a week, Ethan oscillated between a state of panicked dread and a flickering, defiant hope. He spent hours pacing the confines of his suite, rehearsing speeches in the mirror. He would be reasonable. He would be remorseful. He would appeal to Amelia, to the love they once shared, to the child she was about to bring into the world. He couldn't shake the narcissistic belief that this was all a grand theatrical gesture on his father's part, a scare tactic designed to bring him to heel. He still believed he could talk his way out of it. He still believed he had a path back. He tried calling Chloe, the actress, for whom he had torched his entire world. Her agent answered, informing him with a chilly professionalism that Ms. Sterling was unavailable and wished him all the best in his future endeavors. The finality in the agent's tone was unmistakable. He was utterly, completely alone. The morning of the meeting, he dressed with meticulous care in his finest suit, a final pathetic attempt to project the power he no longer possessed. He walked into the main conference room at Vance Innovations, a space he had once commanded, and was immediately struck by the cold, deliberate staging of his own execution. His father, Harrison, sat at the head of the impossibly long, polished mahogany table, a silent, unmoving monolith of authority. To his right, in the seat of honor, sat Amelia. Now, in her final month of pregnancy, she radiated a serene, unshakable strength. She was no longer the heartbroken wife. She was a matriarch in waiting. On the table before her was not a purse, but a leather-bound portfolio. At the far distant end of the table on the opposite side, a single isolated chair had been set for him. Facing him were a half-dozen of the most formidable corporate lawyers on the West Coast. He took his seat, the silence in the room, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The head lawyer, a stern man in his 60s named Mr. Albright, began without preamble. "Ethan," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "we are here today to formalize the consequences of your recent actions. As you know, the Vance Family Trust established by your grandfather is the legal instrument that governs the family's assets and your position within its corporate structures. He opened a thick binder. Article 7, Section 4 of the Trust. A section I believe you have a copy of is what is commonly referred to as the Character and Integrity Clause. It grants the acting patriarch broad discretionary power to amend or revoke a beneficiary's inheritance in the event that said beneficiary engages in conduct that brings public disrepute upon the Vance name or acts in a manner that willfully destabilizes the family's core business interests. Albright looked at Ethan over the top of his reading glasses. It is your father's legal position that your actions at the philanthropy gala, the public and cruel dissolution of your marriage to a pregnant spouse, and the subsequent instability and reputational damage your behavior has caused represent a profound and unequivocal violation of this clause. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Albright held up a hand. Let me be clear. What follows is not a negotiation. It is a dissemination of information regarding decisions that have already been made and legally ratified. For the next 20 minutes, Albright methodically dismantled Ethan's life piece by piece. His employment with Vance Media and all other Vance entities was terminated effective immediately. All unvested stock options were voided. His corporate credit cards, accounts, and access privileges had already been revoked. Then came the final devastating blow. The matter of your inheritance has been restructured. Albright continued, turning a page. Your primary share of the Vance family trust, which would have passed to you upon your father's death, has been legally and irrevocably redirected. A new independent trust has been formed. The sole beneficiary of this new trust will be your biological child and any future children you may have with Amelia Vance. Ethan stared, his mind struggling to keep up. His child. He still had a connection. This new trust, Albright said, delivering the coup de grace, will be managed by 2 co-trustees who will have sole discretion over all assets until the beneficiary reaches the age of 30. Those co-trustees will be your father, Harrison Vance, and the child's mother, Amelia Vance. The room spun. It was a complete and total erasure. He would be a ghost, a footnote in his own child's immense fortune, a fortune that would be controlled by his ex-wife and the father who despised him. This isn't legal. He stammered, the words catching in his throat. You can't just take my birthright. He turned his desperate bulls to Amelia. Amelia, please. He begged, his voice cracking. Don't let him do this. Think of our child, our family. Amelia met his gaze, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was not angry, not vengeful, but filled with a steely resolve. I am thinking of my child, Ethan, she said. In fact, she is the only thing I have thought about for the past month, and I have come to realize that the greatest gift I can ever give her is a life free from your influence, a life where she is not exposed to your cruelty, your instability, and your profound lack of character. This isn't something my father-in-law is doing to you. This is the direct consequence of what you did to us. Ethan, shattered by her words, turned his wild, pleading eyes to his father. Father, please. Harrison Vance finally spoke, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake of finality. Your grandfather was a wise man, Ethan. He understood that an empire is not preserved by blood alone, but by character. He built this company from nothing with his bare hands and the force of his will. I have spent my life honoring that legacy building upon it. And you treated it like a plaything. You used the power and security it gave you not to build, but to indulge your own petty vanities and insecurities. He stood up, the full intimidating force of his presence filling the room. You stand here and you talk of your birthright. You have no birthright. You have squandered it. You have proven you are not a builder. You are a vandal, and I will not stand by and watch a vandal destroy my life's work." He gestured toward Amelia. "She has the one thing you never will, Ethan. She has character. She has integrity. She is a builder. The future of this family and this company is safer in her hands than it ever was in yours." Mr. Albright slid one final document across the table. It was a separation agreement offering a one-time lump sum payment of $10 million, a fraction of his lost inheritance. In exchange, he would waive all future claims. It was a choice between walking away with a fortune most people only dream of, or fighting and being left with absolutely nothing. With a hand that shook so violently he could barely hold the pen, Ethan signed his name. He signed away his company, his inheritance, his family, his future. He stood up from his isolated chair, a man utterly hollowed out, and walked from the room without another word. As he passed through the gleaming lobby of the company his grandfather had founded, the employees, his former employees, averted their eyes. He was already a ghost. A month later, Amelia gave birth to a beautiful, healthy daughter. She named her Clara, a classic, strong name, a name with no ties to the recent painful past. In the quiet, sunlit hospital room, Harrison Vance held his granddaughter for the first time. His stern, powerful face transformed by a look of absolute, unconditional love. He looked at Amelia, her face filled with the tired, joyful glow of new motherhood. The succession was complete. The future of the House of Vance was secure. 2 years later, the Grand Hall of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was filled with the bright, optimistic energy of the city's tech and philanthropic communities. It was the inaugural gala for the Amelia Vance Foundation. At the podium stood its president, Amelia Vance, a woman radiating a confidence and purpose that was entirely her own. "Legacy," she said to the rapt audience, "is often thought of as something we inherit, a name, a fortune. But I believe true legacy is something we build. It is built through our actions, through our integrity, and through our commitment to leaving the world a little better than we found it." She went on to announce the Foundation's first major initiative, a massive funding project for high-quality, accessible educational programming for children, the very project Ethan had dismissed as a waste of time. From a table near the front, Harrison Vance watched his granddaughter Clara asleep in her stroller beside him. He saw the strength, the vision, the character in the woman on the stage, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he had made the right choice. He had been forced to amputate a part of his own bloodline to save his empire, a choice that would haunt him in his quietest moments. But as he looked at Amelia, and then at the sleeping child, who would one day inherit it all, he understood that he had not lost a son. He had gained a daughter, and in doing so had secured a future for the Vance name far greater than Ethan could ever have conceived. The reckoning was over. The rebuilding had begun. Ethan Vance's cruel betrayal, meant to be a declaration of his own freedom, instead triggered his complete and total ruin. He mistakenly believed that his bloodline made him untouchable. But his father, the legendary billionaire Harrison Vance, made a choice dictated not by blood, but by character, choosing his honorable daughter-in-law over his own disgraced son. This is a stunning story of family dynamics, corporate power, and the ultimate triumph of integrity over inheritance. While Ethan was left with nothing, Amelia rose from the ashes to become a powerful leader, reshaping the Vance legacy in her own image. What did you think of Harrison's decision? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of power and principle, please hit that like button, share it, and subscribe for more unforgettable dramas.